Where are you logging in from?
I live in Romania, Timișoara, which is close to the border with Serbia.
Oh, really? Cum este vremea acolo? Many would argue that the digital product business is about the most viable and lucrative venture anyone could start today.
Yeah, there is still that idea, of build it and they will come. And a lot of people are just build something, they put it out there, and then they just wonder why people don't come to buy it. Oh, we will build this whatever product that's out there, and we will add another feature on top. Or we might make it cheaper, or whatever. It's like, but the difference is very, very small. They think that small difference would really make an impact and people would switch. And most of the times it just doesn't happen. And it makes sense that it's not happening. It's not your customer's task to actually solve the problem. They just have to be there, and you as the entrepreneur or the founder have to figure out their problem and how you solve it. Because if you ask a person what they would need and they say that they need a faster horse, that means that they just need a faster way to travel from point A to point B. And it can be a horse, a car, a train, a rocket, an airplane, or whatever else. If we go by the book Running Lean, which is written by Ash Moria, the whole idea is that first you validate that there is a problem. So it's like, problem validation, solution validation, and MVP validation.
Daniel, what's the biggest mistake you've made in your entire career?
There is one that I know well, and I usually tell to founders because they tend to do the same thing.
A huge reason why the tech industry is so loved by many is the limitless opportunities it provides for building a digital product business, particularly one that has software as its main product. According to MasterCard, the volume of digital product transactions has increased by over 70% in the last 2 years alone. Now, that implies there is ample room to join this digital banquet. Our guest today is on a mission to help you launch and scale your own digital product business. Daniel Andor is a product design expert, and he's also the founder of Durran. He has been doing this for over 15 years, and I'm genuinely happy and thrilled to have him on this episode. Hello, Daniel. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thanks. Glad to be here.
Where are you logging in from?
I live in Romania, Timișoara, which is close to the border with Serbia.
Oh, really? Cum este vremea acolo?
Nowadays it's quite rainy, and we are preparing for the winter holidays, so it's a bit cold, but otherwise it's fine. It's a nice city.
Ok. Am înțeles. Deci plouă acolo. Da. Și aici plouă de obicei. Yeah. Daniel, if you don't mind, in your own words, I just made a feeble attempt to let the viewers know who you are and what you do. Could you just briefly introduce yourself and tell us what you do in the tech space?
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, that my background is in product design or UX design. I do this for 15 years now. I started working in different product companies back then and kind of translated that knowledge into freelancing, and then establishing Durran, which is a product design studio. We try to use lean approaches in setting up the new businesses by defining MVPs, testing with customers, but going towards established businesses as well, where we help them with their growth ideas and figure out what's not working in their business and how we can help them to scale.
Interesting. There is an aspect of this podcast which aims to help tech professionals and those aspiring to get into the tech industry to build a thriving career in the space. So would you mind sharing just a little bit background of your own career story? Maybe how you got started in tech, the early beginnings, and probably what motivated you to keep going for 15 long years?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I guess a lot of people my age in Romania, we started by downloading Photoshop from the torrents back then.
uTorrent.
We didn't buy it, we just exact. And we started just playing around with it and see how it goes, editing photos and creating posters and stuff like that. I ended up working in a small in a somewhat small ad agency, or like actually I don't know if it's like what it was a small agency. Basically, we were doing like business cards and all kind of designs for some businesses and helping them with like almost anything that was printed, basically. From there, through a friend, I ended up in something that today we would call a startup studio. Basically, it was a company that had a couple of digital products launched, and they were trying to scale them. Some of them are still live today and working, and they're doing okay business. Most of them are bootstrapped. So for those kind of stuff in Romania, they are doing quite a good job, I would say. And yeah, it was, in a way, it was a fortunate event, I would say, from transitioning from downloading Adobe Photoshop from the torrents, as you mentioned, to ended up working on digital products and impacting millions of users. But they had quite a large user base back then. And yeah, what kept me going? Yeah, it's one of those things that once you start, it's like you have a lot of stuff that you can explore and learn. You have a lot of resources, and you can, in a way, almost create your own path. So probably that. You can layer on top of your base knowledge a lot of other skills. Like I started from downloading Photoshop and creating business cards, to designing interfaces, and then checking user flows, and then working with engineering teams and product managers and all kind of teams, and basically designing and setting up and doing strategy in the background for different products.
From your explanation, when you mentioned a lot of resources, I'm assuming you then self-taught as well. You researched most of this information, and then you learned.
Yeah, I'm mostly self-taught.
Interesting. And how was it, breaking into the job market when you first got in?
Back then, I would say it was a bit easier somehow. It was, in my case, it was by luck, and like they needed somebody who knew Photoshop. I knew Photoshop, and I know somebody in the company, so it was easier to get in. But on the other side, you didn't have access to a lot of resources. So it's not like you would buy, I don't know how many courses and then go to boot camps and stuff like that, because we didn't have all those. So it was a lot of learning and trying out stuff and seeing what's working in our setup and what's not a good fit for our setup. I bought a bunch of courses that I found back then on Udemy and read books. Kind of that's how I started learning more. But honestly, I'm still a big fan of books. So even if I learn something new, I still try to buy the book. If there is a book and a course, I still buy the book.
Likewise.
It just gives a bit more depth, I would say, and for some it's easier to read.
Just the smell of the wood, right? Smell of the papers.
Also that, yeah.
And I just want to echo what you mentioned. You're completely right. Back then, the little information you could get, they had way more value than today. Today you've got millions of courses, most of them created by AI, with very little value, very little depth. So a self-taught person.
Back then I would say.
Yeah, you can tell they actually went the extra mile to search for that information because they were actually passionate about what they were looking for.
You had to, in a way. Even nowadays, I would say nowadays it might be a bit more challenging because, as you mentioned, there are a lot of courses and it's really hard to make sense of what are the good ones. I bought my own not so good courses as well. So this is how you learn and make the difference between what's good and what's not good, or what's working for you and what's not really working for you. But back then, the feeling was that a lot of people who started sharing their, in a way, learnings, courses, blog posts were people that were actually doing the stuff. And from their experiences, they shared what they learned. Versus nowadays, when it's like a lot of, I'm not bashing now on coaches and stuff, but I have this feeling that a lot of people are just doing the talks, but not really doing the stuff. and there's a lot of noise out there. So for somebody who's starting out, and I get these questions from time to time from like junior designers, like, what should I learn? Where should I start? Like, you would assume that given the amount of content that's out there, it's easier, but actually it might end up being more challenging than before.
I can imagine. Having the luxury of choice doesn't necessarily make things easier for anyone. Same thing applies in the dating market, applies in information and learning.
Exactly.
Daniel, if we may delve into the crux of this episode, we're going to be speaking about, successfully launching a digital product business. How about we tell the audience what we mean when we speak about DPB, digital product business? Want to help me with that?
Sure. I can tell you what I meant by digital products. There are a lot of digital products. Courses in the end are still digital products in a way. I usually, when I talk about digital products, I talk about SaaS businesses or products that sell subscriptions in order to be used. And this is, in a way, what we worked on quite a lot. So anything that's like web apps, mobile apps, these kind of stuff.
Okay. And that would, by mobile apps, that of course includes games, right? Because games have become so popular.
Yeah, games are not our stuff, but yeah, they might include games as well. Yeah. We don't work on games. That's a slightly different area with like game design and stuff like that. We don't do those kind of stuff. We are more specialized on SaaS products.
Oh, okay. Makes complete sense. Many would argue that the digital product business industry, particularly in this day and age, is about the most viable and lucrative venture anyone could start today. As an expert in that field, what's your opinion about this?
There is still that idea, of build it and they will come. And a lot of people are just build something, they put it out there, and then they just wonder why people don't come to buy it. It's still a business, I would say. So you still have to have knowledge of, besides building the product, selling the product. And I also mentor in a bunch of like accelerators and incubators, talking with early stage founders. Most of them coming from a development or an engineering background. And for some, it's really hard to make the switch from the person that knows how to write the code and how to build the product, like actually just, how to put it, actually building it, not thinking about what to build, but actually just build. And making that switch from there to figuring out what and how to build and how to sell the thing that you build, or why you should build the product as you're supposed to do it. So there is, it might look as an easy thing that you can build something nowadays, even with AI tools, and just put it online. But that's just a small part of what the story. You have to do a lot of other things. You have to figure out acquisition, you have to figure out sales, you have to figure out how you will scale that thing. So it's like a lot of stuff that you have to think about, plan it out. And it, in a way, it fits in the same topic as we discussed with the courses. There are a lot of products out there. So you have to figure out also how you are different from what's already out there, and why somebody would choose your product or would switch from a competitor to your product.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And speaking of challenges, I think one of the biggest challenges faced by people looking to succeed in this field is finding that PMF, they call it, product market fit, right? Finding the right product that's actually desired by consumers and solves a problem, a significant problem for the vast majority. Having worked in that field, I have no doubt you know the importance of solopreneur or someone starting out getting that product market fit right. Do you have some tips or some strategies or some advice you typically dish out to people to help them nail this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. in the end, product market fit is the thing that everybody wants to get at one point. And then even if you get it on one customer segment, then it doesn't mean that you have on all of the customer segments. It means that you have for one specific customer segment that you picked. And then if we think about it this way, then obviously what you have to figure out is the customer. Who's your customer? What are their needs? And what are those problems that you can solve for them, or how your product fits in their life in a way that makes sense and solves a big problem for them. So keeping that in mind, you definitely have to start in a way from understanding the customer. And this is one of the things that especially technical people kind of not necessarily forget, but delay, I would say. They start building the product and the customer is somehow left on the side, and they get to see the product or give feedback on the product once the product is built or launched, which a lot of times it's very, very late. It can take months or years to actually build out a product. And what we help our customers do is cut that time frame that you need to launch a product. We don't actually build the product, we prototype it. We just create a mock-up of the product and we go with that to test it out. And we can do that in a couple of weeks. So based on what you want to test, obviously you have different ways to discuss those kind of aspects with your customers or potential customers. But if there would be one thing that I would really, really highlight in this part is like, keep in mind your customer and figure out a way that you can integrate their feedback and their way of thinking and their problems into what you're building. Because there is that saying that it's, in a way, people say that it's from Henry Ford, but nobody knows if from Henry Ford it is or not. That if he would ask what people need, they would say that they need a faster horse and not a faster car, or not a car. And he built the car. And the thing is, and what I usually suggest people is like, it's not your customers' task to actually solve the problem. They just have to be there, and you as the entrepreneur or the founder have to figure out their problem and how you solve it. Because if you ask, in that specific example, if you ask a person what they would need and they say that they need a faster horse, that means that they just need a faster way to travel from point A to point B, and it can be a horse, a car, a train, a rocket, an airplane, or whatever else.
That's a very delicate thing where a lot of people tend to gloss over quickly. First you have to really genuinely understand what problem they are facing, right? And not necessarily listen to what it is they say they want. You listen to what's the problem itself and find a solution that you, now having that knowledge and expertise, what you think would be the optimal solution for that problem.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we discuss with even like people that launch their products. And once you launch a product, there is like a lot of feature requests that come in, or people complaining about different stuff in the product. And especially early stage founders, they just create a list of the features that people ask and they just start executing on that. And in some cases it might work, in some cases it might not. In most of the cases, probably it won't work out. Because one, it's not your customer's job to figure out how to solve something. They might not be technical. In some cases they are, but in most cases they are. So they might not know what's possible or feasible technically to build. And the second part is, you also have to figure out if the thing that they ask for fits in your strategy or not. Because there might be two products in the same domain with different strategies altogether, and one would implement that feature and the other one wouldn't implement it. There is a good example of, I know that I read it some time ago, of two dating apps, since you mentioned the dating stuff. Tinder and the other one, which I forgot their name. And the guy who was the CPO of Tinder mentioned that the other product was basically, he called it an anti-Tinder. Tinder's job was to keep you in the product. The other one's job was to find you a soulmate and delete the product. So though they have some basic features which were very, very similar, like a feed and a way to message and I know a couple of other things, they also had features which were very, very different because their end goal or the strategy was completely different in the end, even if they would compete in the same area or the same domain.
I did some background research in your profile as well to see what your company does and what you do. Forgive me.
No worries.
I noticed you're quite big on a founder or an entrepreneur understanding properly what it is their business solves, what problem their business solves. I think you kind of made it clear that if a business owner fails to properly understand their own solution, it's very unlikely that they will succeed, right?
Yeah, it's very hard to not... Like, there are founders, and I still met a couple of them, especially early stage, where they think about, oh, we will build this whatever product that's out there, and we will add another feature on top. Or we might make it cheaper, or whatever. It's like, but the difference is very, very small. And then they think that small difference would really make an impact and people would switch. And most of the times it just doesn't happen. And it makes sense that it's not happening because one, you don't understand the customer and you make an assumption that you don't test. The assumption is that if you add that on top of whatever is existing, then people will come, meaning that that need is so big for the customer that they would make the switch from a product they already invested in. But if that's your assumption, you also assume in a way indirectly that the company that you will compete with, they don't know about that thing. And most of the times that company, it's an established company with a lot of people and a lot of money versus you who's just starting out. And also with a lot of time in the space. And in a way, I would say that it's a bit selfish to think that you know better a domain that you just go into without the domain knowledge. A lot of times that's the setup, and you go into that domain and you will compete like one-to-one with somebody who's an established business and it might make millions and they have, or even more than millions, versus you who just started out with, I don't know, whatever pocket money you had. So the only, and it goes to another, it raises another problem as well. What also happens is that people will start to do feature parity. So means that they will just copy the features that have the other ones, put it in their product, so they can't launch anything up until they don't get feature parity, which is very bad in the end because you will just delay a lot of things. You won't show it to your customers or potential customers, so you will just stay in your room and code. So going back to the question, if you want to succeed in this field, which is highly competitive, it's not like 2005 or 2007 where just just a couple of products popping here and there, and like it was open road to anybody who wrote a blog post and SEO ranked them and whatever. So if you want to really have a chance, then you have to have a good understanding of the customer, so you can figure out what are those critical features that you can or have to build in the beginning in order to make them switch, or in order to get your product, or in order to make your product a better fit for a very specific niche customer segment versus something that's already established. Because it's really hard to compete with somebody who's already established. Start from the beginning. So kind of that's the idea. And that goes back in a way to how well you understand the problem and your customer.
Makes perfect sense.
Or how much knowledge you have about the problem. Because sometimes you have the knowledge from working in the field, and you know that there is something that's not solved in the proper way for a very specific target audience, and that's a good starting point. Or at least you start digging into customer segments and problems and see how it goes.
If curiosity, they say, kills the cat, I guess over ambition kills the techpreneur. Being sometimes overly ambitious and thinking they can do better than these behemoths of companies who've got thousands of people working around the sun to build something. So they have advantages. But sometimes they try to play by the same rules. And then
basically that kind of kills your advantage. So they try to do, like, as I mentioned, they try to do feature parity, and that takes a lot of time when your advantage is like you can move fast and you can do stuff that doesn't scale. And a lot of people don't think like this. They just try to copy what the other ones are doing. Or they try to copy what those companies are doing today, not what those companies did 10 years ago when they were at the starting of the whole road.
That is deep. And thanks for sharing that. Speaking about success strategies for these digital product businesses to succeed, I see you are a huge proponent of this lean methodology, and you advocate for it, and you try to advise your clients to apply that in their business. Could you tell us why this is important and what it is in the first place?
Sure. So it kind of goes back to a couple of books. There was Lean Startup and Running Lean, which how I translate them usually to people is like Lean Startup is the theory, Running Lean, it's the actual example of how you do it.
Okay. And if we may just for the audience, so Lean, it's spelled as in Lean. Okay. Lean.
If you want to put it in a nutshell, it's basically building the product while you get feedback from your customers, and you go in an iterative process of building it. So it's not necessarily very linear, but the idea is that you can define some milestones, you have some check-ins with your customers, and you go from that to the next stage. If we go by the book Running Lean, which is written by Ash Moria, then he proposes, from what I remember, 3 big milestones, which is problem, solution, fit. Oh God, and now I forgot them.
Yeah, you have a lean memory at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, I have a very lean memory. Yeah. The whole idea is that first you validate that there is a problem. So it's like, problem validation, solution validation, and MVP validation. Yeah, that's not. We have it now. So you first validate that there is a big enough problem.
Okay.
And that means that usually that goes usually by having different discussions and interviews with customers and figuring out the niche, figuring out their problem, how important is the problem for them, and if there is anything that you can build around it. And the second part is figuring out the solution, validating or testing the solution. And even in that stage, basically you don't really build anything. It's still about a bunch of interviews most of the times. From case to case, you can show maybe prototypes and stuff like that. But here you want to find out kind of what are those features that you have to build or how the solution would look like. And then you move towards validating the MVP, and we can go into a very big discussion about what an MVP is. There's like a lot of people thinking about it in very different ways and have very different names for the same thing.
Just in
I
two
usually
sentences,
think about the MVP.
Yeah, do you mind telling us what that is? I know what it is, minimum viable product, but just for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so if we are talking about MVP as the minimum viable product, which was the initial definition of it, the problem with this definition was in a way that a lot of people felt very different from what's viable and what's a product and what's minimum. So from this point on, a lot of people came up with a lot of names for it. And we kind of sticked with what Marty Kagan said in Inspired, and he kind of flipped it from minimum viable product to minimum viable prototype, in the idea that you put something to test in front of your customers. The whole thing is, and why the discussion around minimum viable products is that, I don't know, a lot of people have different ideas on it, because as we discussed, how people think about products nowadays, and their expectations are higher than what it was before. But that's actually, if you say this in general, is true, but it might not be true for a specific segment. So if you pick segments that are not digitalized yet, their expectations are not higher because they don't have other options, right? But if you pick a segment that's highly digitalized, then their expectations is higher because they already have competitors in the field. So you would have to at least be close to that as a quality of what you sold. This is why there is a lot of discussion about what's an MVP. Basically, the whole reason behind the MVP is to test your assumptions. And all of these things are testing assumptions, but you move from having discussions to showing something slightly and discussions to actually putting something in front of your customers and see if they would buy it. Kind of that's the idea.
That's very interesting. I'm trying to summarize my understanding of the lean methodology. So ultimately, it is some form of, a strategic approach to building your product, whatever that is, in iterations, right? You get feedback and then you add to what you have built, and you just follow that method.
You want to basically de-risk as much as possible. So it's like what I usually tell to founders: look, you can play the lottery with one ticket, and you put all your money in that one ticket, and the chances of winning it's quite low. Versus you can place smaller bets, but very often. And you can also increase the chances of succeeding for the next bet.
The downside I see to this, Daniel, it might take a way longer time, right, for someone to eventually become a billionaire. If you always have to start,
it usually
test,
don't happen overnight.
test. I guess for each of those stages you've just nicely explained just now, we might actually spend a lot of time just on the first stage alone trying to validate the problem. Because if it doesn't work, we throw it out in the trash, start another one. And before you know it, it's a decade and you're still there testing out problems.
You can do that in like throwing out and changing the problem maybe in like increments of weeks versus thinking that you nailed the problem, building a product for 1 year and then figuring out that it's not the right one.
And spending a lot of money from investors. So that makes perfect sense. And then when you spoke about, the second stage, that whole solution validation stage where you mentioned the MVP should be put out. And I like that twist with the protocol, minimum viable protocol. What's your take about the craze that I am observing right now in the market, especially with artificial intelligence, where almost everyone now can whip up a solution in a weekend using artificial intelligence in the back end to pretend like it's a grand SaaS solution that's fully functional. However, it's all AI in the back, but at least it gets the job done and it's able to test the market to see if it could really solve the problem for people. Some people call this kind of a fake it until you make it method. What do you think? Is this a safe way for businesses to get off the ground today?
Tough question. In the end, you can think about it as a prototype, I assume. So you can use it to test different ideas and see what works and what's not working.
I would call it a ChatGPT Pro Genie.
So if the output is just like a lot of AI projects are like that. If the output is just another ChatGPT interface, then I would say it's really hard to do anything with it, because what's your edge on top of ChatGPT or OpenAI? If you have something that's proprietary for yourself, then it's a different discussion. We worked on some AI projects this year and end of next year, and actually interviewed with some of the customers. And I even wrote about something like this on LinkedIn a couple of days ago. For me, if I just see the input box with like you have to prompt, type in, for me that's like the lazy option of solving. Basically, you don't solve the problem because you switch it to the customer to figure it out in a way. And usually what some of the founders that did something like that told me is that, but the customer can do anything. Well, that's true, but that's also the problem. They can do anything. Most of them don't know how to prompt. This was one of the learnings that we had on one of the AI projects we worked on. Like, they love the project, they love to use it, but they didn't know how to use it, actually, some of the parts, because they had to prompt and they didn't know how to write the prompting part. And they didn't know how to write it in a way that every time they get the same output. And since they don't have the same output, then it's not that valuable. It's like almost like you play the lottery again. Like, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good. So you have to like regenerate the whole thing and you have to try again and so on and so on. So for some, if you target customers that are highly technical, skilled and know how to prompt, then that might be a solution. You just wrap it into a chat interface. if you target customers that are not in that bucket, then you might have a problem because they don't necessarily know how to use it. And the fact that they have a lot of options, it might be the problem as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Still on that subject matter of avoiding the common pitfalls that prevent these companies from really succeeding, the digital product companies or businesses. I see you're also big on business owners nailing the UI/UX part of the entire operations. Do you want to elaborate and just let us know what that's all about?
Yeah, sure. So my background is in product design, so I'm definitely very passionate about nailing the UI/UX. But I get it when at the beginning you have to make shortcuts, and I'm fine with that. It's not a problem if you make the right shortcuts.
By shortcut, you mean?
Some people don't invest too much in this stage of UI or UX, and they just throw stuff together, and it might work up to a point. And there are usually two paths that we tend to see. They, like, in the beginning, most of the founders that we end up working with, they kind of use a UI library or some kind of library that they can find, and I'm very okay with that. It's like, if it works, go with that. I'm fine with it. The problem is usually not there. The problem is that what some of them end doing is they start customizing the library in the sense that they broke the patterns of the library, and then things that didn't align well, things didn't look that well anymore, and they actually sometimes make the product not just not look great, but actually challenging to use. And that's the problem. That's a problem, because then you work really hard to get customers to your product. You get a few of them in the beginning, and those people might not know how to use the product, or they just see something that's like looking weird, doesn't work as expected, and they just leave. And then what you do? You have to work on other people's to get them again into the top of the funnel, and they might have exactly the same experience, right? So if you use a UI kit, and I saw a lot of people, at least on the early stage founders, do it, just don't break it. Like, use it as it is, because they have the rules, they have things that are working in a specific way, they have the patterns defined, the spacings, and so on. Just use it as it is. It's fine. Developers usually tend to break those because they find the buttons too high, or the spacings too big, or the font sizes, whatever, and they start changing those. And sometimes they just break it, and it looks weird. And when somebody sees it, even if you're not a designer, you have that feeling that something is off, but you don't necessarily know what it's off. But you have that feeling that it's like that. It doesn't look polished. It looks a bit old. Something is off on the product, and you might say, "Oh, but it's just aesthetics." It's true, it's just aesthetics, but aesthetics is one of the first thing that hits you when you think about credibility. Do I trust this product to deliver? Like, if it looks like this, do they take care of the rest of it? Am I okay with giving them access to my data? So in a way, that's the first thing that hits you.
Yeah. Also, Daniel, I'm sure none of our viewers is living under some rock, but UI/UX, do you just want to let us know what that is?
Oh yeah, that's a weird combination of stuff, and like because for big corporates, usually these are separate roles, and you have the UI designer and the UX designers, user interface designer and user experience designer.
Okay.
Now for
so that's
startups,
where the acronyms came from, right? User interface.
Yeah, that's the UI. It's a user interface. Exactly.
Someone would expect UE, but it's UX.
Yeah, and for startups, because they usually don't have the resources to get two people on the job, they get one, and that's like a generalist, and they were named UI/UX. Nowadays they are product designers, but there is a slight difference between the roles. Product designer is usually closer. They usually tend to have, or at least this is how it's supposed to be, have a somewhat business knowledge as well. So they know that what they do impacts the business in a specific way. So we do these kind of changes because we want to increase, retention or activation or whatever. And if we increase that, then we increase revenue, stuff like that. So, going backwards, this is the UI UX design. And as I mentioned, the other part of it, and which is usually the bigger problem in the beginning, is that if they don't break, or even if there is the UI aspect and there is the UX aspect of this thing, right? That's usually the bigger problem, because you can go past the fact that something is not looking okay, but if you can't use the product, it's kind of useless. Or if it doesn't make sense, or if it's, I don't know, just doesn't work. And we had this kind of stuff with some of the projects, like some of the customer feedback that we went through, because when we start working on projects, we usually don't work that much nowadays on the MVP stage. We work on usually after 6 to 1 year since they launched, and they already have some customers in the product, and they have some feedback collected, and then they know that there is a problem, but they don't necessarily what's the problem. And they also have some money, so they want to invest in it, because they know that this product, the product works. There is a problem that we can solve, but we are not solving it the right way, or the product might not be up to the expectations of our customers. And they get this information from the customers already. And then the problem is quite clear. There is the problem, we have to solve it, otherwise they will leave. And some of the feedback that we got from our customers, or what they were getting actually from their customers, is that they were asking for features that were in the product, but they couldn't find them. So they were asking for, I don't know, whatever feature for doing their job, and the founders were, but we have this feature, but they didn't know about it because they couldn't find them. That's a UX problem.
Makes perfect sense.
And then usually if you don't solve these things, some people might just leave. That's one. You might lose revenue, obviously. We had another project where they were getting a percentage, like how the business model was that they were getting a subscription fee plus a success fee. And because the flow was broken and people couldn't finish actually the job in the product, they moved the whole discussion. They were matching basically job seekers with people that have different jobs. And because they couldn't finish the whole sequence of this thing in the product, they could just start it. The business was losing money because they didn't know if it was success, if those that were hiring found the perfect match for their jobs. They didn't know about this. So either the person that put the hiring offer on the platform came back to them and said, hey, we hired through your platform and here's your money, or they just couldn't collect it because they didn't know about it.
Yeah.
So that's also partially a UX problem as well.
Interesting and very, very insightful there, what you've just shared. Daniel, as this episode winds to a close, help me here to summarize a set of takeaways for these business owners or aspiring business owners looking to launch and scale, a successful digital product business. So I would try to summarize here with your help. So first of all, they should, adopt as much as possible the lean methodology, which is an iterative way of building products by taking feedback and then improving the product as you go along.
Yeah.
Right. Also to have minimum viable prototype when they can.
Prototype, yes.
And also again learn from the customers and adopt whatever learnings they gather in their product. Also, the importance of appearance and the UI part should not be underestimated, as well as UX, which you also think that's significantly more important.
They have to understand really well what's the stage of the domain they are going into, and because they can't be way off of that.
What does that mean?
So if you want to build another CRM, let's put it that way. If you want to build another CRM, you have to know what are the other CRMs that are successful in the CRM
right?
business.
Do your research.
Yeah, you have to. Exactly. You have to understand and you have to see, okay, we have these CRMs, they might be, or these products, if you want to not be that like a CRM focused. Okay. We have these products, they might have slightly different target audience. And then you have to understand which is your direct competition from there, or there might be a couple of products that are direct competition for you, and you cannot be very, very off of that. So it's not that they are high polished products and they look great and work well and whatever, and you just put something together that doesn't work and like just put it out there and like see how it goes. The chances are very slight to make it succeed.
Okay, that
so
makes sense.
You have to understand your competition.
Yeah, understand your competition, do your study, and make sure you have some form of edge over them with what you bring into the market.
Exactly.
That's good to add to our summary. Then there was this one I really, really liked, which was, you nicely differentiated solving a problem for a customer, right? As opposed to giving them what they think they need as a solution, which was really very eye-opening. So I'm adding that to our summary, right? Properly understanding the problem of a potential customer, and then with your expertise, go and build what you think is the most optimal solution for that particular problem. So there's a slight nuance there, which should not be shoved under the rug. That brings us to 5, which is a good solid number. Anything else you want to add to help these people strategy-wise?
What helped us a lot with some of the customers, we started to mapping assumptions. And basically
assumptions.
Whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like you think you have a hypothesis, right?
Okay.
Up until the fact that that hypothesis is not proved, it's just that it's a hypothesis, right? So we collected all those hypotheses or assumptions on three categories, and don't make me name the categories because I usually forget them. So I know that we have 3. A very lean memory. Yeah, we have frameworks for all of these. This is why sometimes I don't know all the aspects. I know them when I run
don't know anyone, so I don't know what type of memory that is. Yeah.
Yeah, so we basically map out the assumptions. We put them on a scale to see what are those assumptions that are critical for the business and we don't have evidence for those. And we try to figure out how we can test them. And in some cases, these might be interviews, these might be, landing page testing, value proposition testing, there might be prototypes, there might be MVPs, there might be code, there might be whatever. But the whole thing is that, and if you want to summarize this like everything in a very small sentence, maybe, it's like you have a bunch of assumptions, you want to test those out in order to go in an iterative process instead of like just testing out all those assumptions that you have by not necessarily wasting, but like building 1 year and then figuring out if it's working or not working.
Yeah.
And then you go like you have assumptions regarding the problem, so you want to test those assumptions, right? You have assumptions regarding how the solution might look like and the pricing model. You want to test those. You have assumptions regarding how the product might work and what are the flows, and then you do a prototype and you test those. So this kind of gives you a clearer idea about how things, what are those important parts of the product and your business that in a way are not supported yet. You don't have evidence for them, and you try to collect as much as possible. Now you don't have to go on the other side of this, which some founders do. Is like, oh, we want to talk with thousands of customers and collect, because it will take a lot of time. You most probably can't do it. Again, you're a small startup, just starting out. You will have access to a couple of people in the beginning. You can definitely try to find groups where the people that you want to help gather in a way or the other, but most probably you still will have access to just, tens, maybe hundreds of people. So it won't be statistical significance on that thing, but you will have enough insights to make it to the next step.
Yeah, from your explanations, it's becoming increasingly more apparent that a lot of the work actually happens on a piece of paper and just on the planning
sometimes
board.
Yes.
Sitting
exactly.
In a group brainstorming. For example, this assumptions strategy you just highlighted here. You could imagine when you have a full list of assumptions, you prioritize them and you begin to test them out. You might be, if a significant assumption turns out to be false, you would have to go back and maybe redo a whole lot of things you've worked on in the past. Some assumptions,
you have to see where,
not all assumptions are equal,
those impact.
Right? Yeah. And then you have to, that's a really careful and methodical way of an OCDC way of product development. I mean, if it works, one thing I'm liking, it's definitely going to save a lot of money, right? Hopefully a lot of time. I don't really know. That's my concern, Daniel. I'm feeling this. You might spend 2 years just, building the perfect thing.
It doesn't.
By the time it's now ready to reach the market, something like, I don't know, the singularity has happened, and
I know
all of that business need is no longer needed by the market.
Mm-hmm. It's not that you have to test everything and like be very methodical of everything. It's more like figure out what are those key aspects that you need to test for your own assumption, how much significance you need, or how much data or ideas or insights, or name it as you want, you need, so you are confident to move to the next step. Mm-hmm. And that's very different from founder to founder. What I suggest is just don't build blindly. It's not like, oh, I have this idea, let's build this product, and like waste a year and building it and we will see what happens. So that's the opposite of this, right? You don't have to go to the opposite way of like doing it. It's like, we will test all the nitty-gritty details and we will talk with 1,000 people for each of these stuff. It's not like that. It's like you just want to get some insights, see if you are on the right path or not, and course correct if it's needed. And it's, nobody can guarantee you that you will succeed either way. It's just you try to get as much data into the system as possible so you know which way to go next.
That makes perfect sense. Good information nonetheless. Daniel, what's the biggest mistake you've made in your entire career? Let's say in the roughly 15 years. Wow. Is there one particular mistake which was the worst? I know we've all made mistakes,
yes,
right?
There is
there's one you'd like to share.
There is one that I know well, and I usually tell to founders because they tend to do the same thing. I thought that I can educate people to become my clients. And that kept me like 1.5 years probably in that position. And basically I joined incubators because I knew how to build, I still know how to build products. So I thought that, I will teach these people, or help them in a way figure out some of the stuff, and some might come to become my clients. It didn't work out at all.
Why not?
And this is...
People are difficult, right?
There is a lot of reasons.
People are arrogant.
There is a lot of reasons. But the problem is that a lot of times, especially for early stage founders, and I highly suggest them not to do it, or not to make it their first acquisition channel or the main acquisition channel, because it's a very long game. In my case, it's like, just think about it. They were founders in the beginning of the road. They don't have the money. Sometimes they don't know what they don't know. And the problem I try to solve for them, it's not the main one. It's not their main problem at that stage. Mm-hmm. Or, and then you have all these stuff. So you can educate them as much as you want, because up until the point they don't feel the pain by themselves, it just won't happen. And it's the same thing for founders as well. You can try to educate people about the fact that I don't know what kind of problem you want to solve. And it might be very true. It's not that the problem doesn't exist. It's just the fact that the people you try to educate on the problem might not be aware of the problem. They might not experience it yet. And you can't really sell something so they don't get into that problem. It's almost like trying to sell them, I don't know, life insurance or life insurance is probably a good example. It's not an easy thing to sell, because you have to think about, something bad might happen, so I have to buy it now. I don't want to happen it then.
Makes sense.
And there isn't just not a lot of people that do that.
Makes sense. And that's a very unique take on that whole, client acquisition. That many people are currently making that mistake right now without being cognizant of the impact or a solution, as you said.
We usually suggest people to start looking at those potential customers or users that they are aware of the problem, they are actively looking for a solution, and they have money to actually pay for it.
That the third one, I was going to add that they have the money, right?
Yeah, otherwise it's like it just won't happen. You want to build a business, don't want to build an NGO. An NGO is a different track, and I don't have experience there, but if you want to build a business, you definitely need the money part.
I completely agree. Daniel, where can the viewers find you online? For anyone looking?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so LinkedIn is the easiest way.
Okay, and what is it, Daniel Andor on LinkedIn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you once again, Daniel. It was a real pleasure, and it was just like drinking water from a fire hose, the information we got from you. Hopefully can be watched in slow motion, and we could get most of that knowledge seep in slowly.
Yeah, if there are any questions, happy to answer. So just, I don't know, if there are any people that have questions, they can hit me up on LinkedIn. I can explain them, rephrase them if needed. Happy to help as much as possible.
On that note, we pull the cuttings on this episode. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and tune in for the next episode for yet another insightful discussion with an equally successful guest. Until the next episode, cheers.